When people are in the eye of the tornado, they're not thinking about, they can't see a way out of it. You in the eye of a storm, you can't see your way out of it, but there is going to be, it's temporary. This is temporary. This is not your last stop. This is not where, your story ends. It continues. We're still growing. This week on Tend to It, we're standing in the garden. Season 1 has been about becoming rooted and rising, about learning that slow is sacred, about preparing soil before expecting bloom, about weathering storms, untangling roots, and pulling weeds without shame. In this season finale, we reflect on what growth really looks like, especially when it's quiet, underground, and unfinished. If you've ever wondered whether your healing is working, if you've ever felt like nothing has changed, if you've ever questioned whether you're blooming fast enough, this episode is a reminder. Roots take time, weather shifts, and the growth isn't always loud. Meet us in the garden one more time this season. Welcome back, loves. Wherever you are, walking, driving, folding laundry, take a moment to land right here with us. Let's breathe together. Inhale and exhale. I'm Aiysha Walida, licensed therapist and storyteller, and this is Tend to It, a space where we remember that mental health, like a garden, needs tending. Today is a recap, a pause and a moment to stand in the garden, the one we've been tending to all season. Before we look at what's grown, I want to acknowledge the person who's been tending this space with me all season, our producer and the founder of Black Unicorn Productions, T. Welcome, T.
Thank you. Glad to be back with you.
Glad to have you here. So we've been doing this thing for a whole season. It's been a journey. And one that I am excited to have you, with me on. So thank you so much for being here. And let's dive in and talk about what we've been tending and what we've taken away from this season.
For sure. But first, I also want to thank you. It's been really dope collaborating with you and watching you hold this space with just so much care every single episode. So I appreciate you as well. All right. So we're going to have a little back and forth conversation. I'm going to ask you some questions, let you reflect. But the whole purpose is just to think about what this season has been teaching us about being rooted and rising, which is the name of this season. And what it's taught us about growth, especially. So in your words, let's dig in.
Let's dig in.
All right. So when we opened episode 1, Welcome to the Garden, we invited people to a new way of thinking about mental health. What did we ask them to leave at the gate?
We asked them to leave comparison, judgment, just being harsh with themselves, overthinking. We asked them to leave those things that kept them from their balance, their peace. Just like for a moment, like this, let's just leave these things here. And I think that just based on the feedback, that is something that people were able to do at least for a moment, to show up for themselves. And just because let's listen, people's attention spans are kind of short. So if you stay with me for an entire episode, Thank you, first of all. But second of all, that speaks to the investment in yourself. There's something that you were getting from this. There is something that you may have felt like you needed and you stuck in there and people showed up for themselves in that way. So I really think that they were able to leave some of those things, behind at the gate.
At the gate. No, I love that. I think that first episode, especially because it was just you inviting people into a space and inviting them into the garden, I think that also helped people to really be curious about what this was going to look like, and especially the idea of like equating a garden to mental health. And how when we're growing things, all kinds of stuff takes place. And so to leave like the perfection and the urgency of wanting that garden to grow real fast at the gate, which leads us to episode 2, Slow is Sacred, talking about urgency. we pushed against this idea of like hustle culture or grind culture.
Mhm.
Why do you think slowness is so uncomfortable for people?
In slowness, people feel like there is nothing happening. They are not seeing an immediate outcome. So they might not feel as productive. They might not feel as successful. They might feel like a failure because, you know, if I don't see anything, then that means like nothing is happening.
Yeah,
There's this
yeah.
thought, which could not be further, from the truth. And having that opportunity to talk through it and say, well, let's talk about the benefits of slowing down and why it's sacred. And I think what
Mhm.
makes it really, really sacred is that it's something that we don't do often, and it's something that is so beneficial to us. And for us to slow down, there's a sacrifice in that because everything
Mm.
else tells us go, 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 go. So the intentionality of slowing down, that's big, and it's brave for you to be able to sit in that. It's an act of bravery, especially this day and age when everything is go time. You know,
Yeah.
every,
Everything is go time. I love so much of what you said. This idea that slowing down doesn't feel like anything is happening. But you said that couldn't be further from the truth. So how might someone, one of our listeners, recognize that slowness is actually working for them?
I think that one of the things they can do is take the time to work to regulate their nervous system. Because what happens is when you are taking time to meditate and to breathe and really being intentional about setting time aside to do that, you can then begin to notice things about yourself. I've had people to say, I notice that I have more space, mental space. I notice that I feel better about, how I start my days before my day even started. I began with this. So I already felt like, one, I gave something to myself. I've done something to myself. I've shown up for myself, but also it's helped to regulate your nervous system. So it sets the tone for the day. But what happens is, as you begin to routinely do some of these things, it gives you data. You get information. And so you can say, I know these are the things that I notice, and I know that it's because of this. I know that it's because of this intentionality. I wasn't doing this before. Or when you find yourself in a routine, you notice a difference, right? You begin to change, things begin to show up, but you kind of fall off. And then you're like, I wasn't I wasn't feeling like this, or, I wasn't responding in this way when I was breathing regularly, when I was meditating regularly. So I think what happens is you're able to notice the changes in how you're showing up for yourself by, just kind of exercise, doing these activities. If I'm doing these things, it's actually doing something as far as regulating my nervous system. So I'm taking note of how I'm responding. And sometimes you don't see it in the beginning. Again, slow is sacred. You're not always going to see the benefits of things right then and there. But I think that continuing to show up and continuing to show up over time, your body recognizes like, oh, okay, we're doing this. The brain's recognize like, oh, okay, this is what happens, and this is what I can do, and this is how I can, function when these things are happening. And then it becomes a part of who you are. It comes a part of how you show up. It comes a part of how you respond in situations and under certain circumstances. And I've literally had people to say like, I was upset about it, but I wasn't as upset as I would have been. And to be able to, make that delineation and be like, yeah, this is what I noticed. I think that is what helps people to recognize how slow can be sacred, whether
Yes,
they
to all
can
of those things.
be.
I know for me, meditating and working out are like two of the tools when everything feels slow. And when I don't meditate or when I don't work out, I can always tell a difference in my body and how I respond to certain things. So, like, absolutely to that.
Yeah.
All right, in episode 3, we talked about preparing the soil and particularly thinking about like setting yourself up for when you know you've planted a seed or that growth is about to happen. we talked about the work that happens before the bloom. So what does preparing the soil look like in real life?
I think that, a big part of that was, you know, preparing the soil has to do with your support system. It has to do with what you have in place as far as a therapist or taking care of your health, putting boundaries in place, being honest with yourself, thinking about your environment. Because if the soil is not good soil, it's going to be very difficult for anything to grow, if at all. So let me look at, like, what is my environment looking like? You know, during that episode, we talked a lot about friends, family, meeting ourselves where we are, taking that time with us to look around, like, what do I need? How do I feel? And if we're able to identify how we feel, we can identify, some of the things, and at least explore what we need and work to get our needs met. And that helps for us to grow, preparing the soil in that way. I look at it in that way, as far as who all gonna be there? who
Yes.
who are there? Who there? Like, who is in this space? What is in this space?
Yeah.
If I notice, if I'm in a cluttered space, I cannot think clearly. I have a
Mm.
very difficult time. It's almost like I breathe differently when the space is clear. And that in and of itself is something environmentally. That has nothing to do. I haven't even left out of the door, because life is what it is. But already, I am creating a level of calmness. I'm preparing myself for whatever may, come. I have more room for it. I have, more mind space to, kind of conceptualize it and work through it and navigate it. But if we're not preparing our soil in a way that creates that space for us, it can make it really, really difficult, for us to thrive and grow.
Yes, to all of the above. We really created this kind of flow of the garden, right? So we started off just inviting people into the space.
Mhm.
Then the first episode, after inviting people to the space, was about slow being sacred, like
Yeah.
really preparing people to understand that when we're growing something, it is going to be slow. And then we shifted into making sure that we prepare the soil with these tools and the right foundations and the community and the friends and like all the things that are going to help that thing grow. And then we moved into understanding that shit, the weather will change, things will happen, they will swoop through and just knock off all of kind of what you have prepared, or at least shake what you've prepared a little bit as you're tending to this garden and
Yeah.
trying to get something to grow.
Yeah.
And in this episode 5, you told a powerful story for our listeners about
Mhm.
when the weather changed in your life and how you had to navigate that and the tools that you needed, um, and the feelings that came up for you. And so, as we think about that and knowing that the weather will change, why is it so powerful to understand feelings as weather instead of like your feelings as a part of your identity or who you are?
Yeah. I think it's important to understand and kind of use that, metaphor of weather, because it changes. Like, when was the last time we had a storm that never ended? It it might be here for a minute, but it's gonna pass. That's just how it works. It's gonna pass. And for you, it will pass. There are moments that we are in when literally, when people are in the eye of the tornado, they're not thinking about, they can't see a way out of it. You in the eye of a storm, you can't see your way out of it, but there is going to be, it's temporary. It's temporary. And it can be very difficult for people to, conceptualize that and understand it. And I think that being able to compare, what you're experiencing, sometimes those hardships and some of those struggles to weather, can give people hope. Like, this is temporary. This is not your last stop. This is not where, your story ends. It continues. You can get through this. So let's work on ways to, kind of cover ourselves, hunker down. What do we have, as protection during the storm? What do we have, to survive during a storm? When people go to those tornadoes and they had those bunkers and all those things, they got everything they need in there. Like, we don't know.
Everything,
They got
yes. All the water, all the canned goods, all they got what they need. Yes.
They have what they need down there. But that the thing is that we recognize that we might be here for a little while. And yes, this storm is horrible. We don't know what it's going to look like when we get out of it or anything like that. But we're here in the here and now. How do we take care of ourselves even in the midst of the storm is a part of it. But always the entire time recognizing that this too shall pass. This is temporary. Doesn't mean that it won't be hard or difficult, but I do think that is, definitely something that comes up when we think about the comparison to weather. To
Yeah.
weather, yeah, it changes.
And I think a lot of people interpret storms as failure. Why do you think that is, and how can we, us people, stop identifying that storm as a failure?
Hmm. I think that it kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier around perfectionism. You know, People have a difficult time with mistakes, messing up, being rejected, all of those things. It's like, I must have done something wrong. I'm bad. This is a horrible thing. I have failed, and when the fact of the matter is stuff happens, it's gonna happen. As long as you living and breathing, something gonna show up. Yes, maybe it could have been something you could have done differently or whatever the case may be. But again, I believe that people have a difficult time with it because they haven't accepted that this is how life shows up sometimes. And I'm not a perfect person, and this is not a perfect scenario. So, meeting myself where I am, accepting these things, how is it that I move forward and navigate life? How is it that I show up for myself and others, even in spite of the things showing up? So, I do think that a part of people kind of comparing or equating storms to failure has to do with this expectation of every day being sunny and every day being, perfect. And it's like, nah, Slim, that is never going to be the case. It's just that's just not how it works, and that is okay. But I think that that's what people have a hard time with. It's like, yeah, this relationship didn't work out. Sometimes relationships don't work out, bro. That's just kind of how it works sometimes. That does not mean that you failed. That means that it didn't work out.
Mm.
But people have a bad habit, which I've noticed, of immediately blaming themselves. It must be something wrong with me. It must be something that I have done wrong. And I think that surrounded in like negative self-talk and some of those things because they want everything to be nice and shiny, and any blemish is like, oh, I messed up, I failed. And that's not the case.
Yes. And I think that's a real human thing as a recovering perfectionist. This idea that anything that is not perfect or that a storm comes through is a representation of something that you've done wrong is a very real and human thing for folks to experience.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is also tied into what we have inherited about ourselves and what we have carried going forward, which leads us to the next episode that we had called Tangled Roots. And in this episode, we talked about those roots, namely being family roots and family ties that we have carried and that sustain us, whether that sustaining is positively or negatively. We've prepared the soil, we know the weather's going to change. Now we have these tangled roots that kind of define what grows and how it grows. And so when you think about tangled roots and you think about that episode, how does untangling roots become a form of growth? Especially if we're thinking about, things rising or growing from there.
You know, Tangled Roots, that was a episode that was kind of close to my heart, you know. And
I
I do
recall. I recall.
I do think that, people, would make comments like, you have to know where you come from to know where you're going. And it's important for us to kind of know and understand what is in our lineage. Like, what
Yeah.
are some of the patterns? What are some of the things that that have shown up time and time again through generation to generation? I remember being in the master's program for counseling when I was in school, and one of the things that we had to do was a genogram. I'd never done a genogram before, and it was eye opening. I was
What
like,
is it? What is a genogram?
okay, so a genogram is when you basically use shapes and to describe who the people are, your mom, dad, whoever.
Okay.
So you go back as far as you can remember. So I started with me, and then I kind of went up. So it's like, okay, these are my parents, and there's a circle and a square. And then you have all the kids that were from that union. And then you branch it off to who were your parents, and who were their siblings, and then who were their parents, and who were their siblings and their children, and all of these things. And then you break down that you can decide who had mental illness, who had any medical conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure. But what I did, because you're in a counseling program, right? Mental health and, substance abuse.
Yeah.
Yo, I got out of
Safe
class
space.
and went straight to my mom and them house. I was like, look at this. We're doomed. Like, what is going on? But, and I'm being facetious, but I'm being absolutely honest. I went straight to my parents' house and I'm like, yo, this is I've never seen it just in black and white. We knew we had an uncle that, was a drunk, grandma, was an alcoholic in a certain way, all of these things, these things, you hear these things, but to see it on paper and to see the prevalence of it. So basically you kind of need to know what it is that you may have inherited, one,
Yes.
and you may have a propensity, two. It helps you to understand where you are. It helps you to assess yourself in a different way. So I might not have seen any of these things in me, but if I know that alcoholism is something that runs in my family, I can be a little more vigilant about how I drink, what is my emotion around drinking, all of those things. And I can communicate that to my children and potentially change the pattern. They can tell their children and, things like that. So these are, kind of some of the things that I think that come from, knowing your lineage. I think is the first thing. It's like, okay, first of all, like let's find out some of these patterns, that may be in the fam that we may not be aware of, and we might be operating in it, not even knowing, where it comes from. But if we're able to, get that insight, it's like, oh, I don't have to fall victim to that. I don't have to lean into that because I'm aware and I got ahead of it. I was proactive. And then I tell a friend, then I'm telling people in the family, like, yeah, girl, because such and such, I'm telling my children. And so we can interrupt cycles. Yeah.
And that interrupt cycles piece is so crucial when we're talking about roots and releasing what's no longer ours. Like at the end of the day, those things may have been inherited or maybe in that genogram or maybe at the root of who we are, but we have the charge and we have the ability to release that so that we can grow in a way that doesn't hold on to some of that generational stuff that we've been taught. But that was also a dope episode, so check it out if you haven't checked it
Oh
out.
yeah, empowering. It was one of the one of my favorites. I enjoy all my episodes, but that was probably it was one that was really close to my heart,
Yeah.
closer than I even realized before the episode. But I think that talking about those things that you don't normally talk about, you talk about things in the spiritual aspect, growing up in the church, you talk about generational curses and, all of these things, but just really talking about, and I think that those things are real. Also, I think that, there are generational choices. There, are, you know, environmental things where it's not necessarily a curse. I just learned it. So
Yes.
let's take the magic out of it and just change the behavior,
Yes.
So
Yes.
I do think that that is a part of it. So I do think that there are, because I believe in things that happens in the spiritual realm. That's me. I do believe that certain things
Me
need to
too.
be, there are curses and things like that. And also, there are choices, there are patterns, there are things that we see that we repeat that we can do differently. There are things that we
Yes.
find ourselves doing that we don't even, all of those things. So I believe that we can make different choices that can change our family tree completely.
100%. And even in changing that family tree 100%, at the end of the day, episode 7 taught us that weeds still pop up, that there are still invasive species that try to impact our growth, that when we are growing, the weeds can try to overtake us. So, how do we, one, know growth is happening even when the weeds show up? And what are some of those weeds that show up while we're trying to grow?
Yeah, I think that, this being able to tell yourself two things can be true. I can be growing and there can be weeds.
And there can be weeds.
And both
Both
and.
and, yes.
Thank you.
Facts. Yes.
But the thing is that, people, fall into this. It has to be one or the other when both things can absolutely, be true. And I think that one of the ways that it can show up is like, okay, I can feel myself thriving. I can, things are still going on. I'm showing up at my job. I'm doing well. Oh, I just got a promotion. And here comes, somebody you meet at let's say you're at the grocery store. They giving good energy. You're like, oh, well, you noticed me. I didn't know. Next thing you know, this person turns into a weed. It's like things are going well, but now I have a distraction. I have something that may be pulling me away. Now, don't get me wrong. Everybody that you meet in a grocery store, it might be your next husband, your wife. I'm not. This.
Yeah.
But we talking about weeds right now. So in this scenario, it can be a distraction. Weeds are something that take you away from, those things that are improving the quality of your life, those things that are healthy for you, those things that are causing you to smile, that bring you joy, the things that, let you know that you're thriving. They're distractions. And I think that, and they're dream killers. They're not even just distractions, they are naysayers, and I think that that takes energy when you're in a space when there is growth and weeds at the same time. At some point, if the weeds are not pulled, if it's not taken care of, it's going to overtake whatever is growing. That's how it works. And even if it takes a while, it is ugly while it's figuring it out. Have you ever seen like a really nice like flower bed or garden or something and the weeds are like just coming through? You're like, dang, that looks horrible. So even though it hasn't completely taken, it just starts to really look bad. It doesn't mean that there isn't growth still taking place, but there is like a blemish on it. There's like it's something that causes it to look, and I'm sure the growth is feeling a certain type of way. It's kind of losing to the weeds. So some of those have to be pulled. Things have to be pruned in order for the growth to truly, push forth and to be able to thrive. Because those two things, even though you can grow with weeds over time, um, it definitely takes over. Yeah.
And I remember in the episode also the idea that like sometimes our own mental thoughts can serve as weeds, like foreboding joy, or like everything is going great and then all of a sudden my
Mhm.
mind starts telling me, oh, something is about to happen, or
Mhm.
this growth can't be as good as it is. And so just thinking about that context, of weeds and invasive species
Yeah.
as well. The
Yeah.
idea that it can be rooted in rocks. Go ahead.
No, no, I was listening. Yes. I mean, I think that, when you think about whose voice you hear the most, is yours.
I think
And
you actually said something like, "Don't play tennis with yourself," or it's something like that. Don't play tennis in your mind with yourself.
And that might have been something that Jessica mentioned. She was,
Jessica,
she
okay,
was on the,
yeah,
on the show that, and it's like you're in your head going
yeah.
back and forth. That you need to get out of your head, and so you can talk to someone else, about this, and like, tell them what you're thinking, because we can be really hard on ourselves. We can have cognitive distortions that impact how we view ourselves, how we view our progress, and all of those things. And sometimes it is very difficult for us to get out of that pattern of thinking without support, without help, without someone else, kind of drawing our attention to it. So to challenge it, because it's like, okay, these are my thoughts. And I actually, believe a lot of these things. And, having someone like a therapist to challenge that, I'm like, what evidence do you have that this is true? Like, do you know this is absolutely true? Okay, so let's talk through it, and be able to put it apart, like, okay, well, it's not true. But unless you have the support of someone else being able to help you do that, a lot of times it is very, very difficult for you to come to the conclusions that can help you to get out of said pattern. So that those can absolutely be those weeds and those distractions just in our own minds. So it can be, for sure, external, but absolutely internal. And I'm inclined to believe that that's probably more often than not what's happening, what is going on in our
Yes.
own minds and in our own heads. Because again, we talk to ourselves. You're going to hear your voice more than you hear anybody else's voice. So the question is, what is it saying?
Yes. What
What
are
is
you
it?
telling yourself,
What
yo?
are you telling yourself?
I'm
So
here for it.
yeah.
All right, so that was like the big trajectory of this season. Hitting all of these elements fundamentally is this idea of being able to recognize how your mental health is like a garden, and we have to prepare the soil. We have to tend to it. We have to make sure that those weeds and invasive species aren't there, and we need to go talk to that lady or man or person on
Talk to the
and sit
person.
on their couch because that's what's going to help us. And you just said something. You said that these two truths can exist at the same time. It's a both and so this season was called Rooted and Rising. And so this idea that you can be firmly planted and also rise at the same time. So after all of this, after all these episodes, after our amazing guests who have joined us this season,
Yeah.
the conversations that you have had with so many different people, to you, host, therapist, storyteller, Aiysha, what does it mean to be rooted and rising?
That is a great question. When I think of being rooted and rising, what that means to me is, I look at being rooted, what we've been doing this entire season. Looking at preparing the soil, thinking about like what are some of the things that we need to slow down on. What is slow is sacred? Like, are we slowing down enough? And what does it look like to slow down and actually doing that? What does it look like to untangle these roots? Let's get to the root of what's going on and some of those things that are in our lineage that we need to look through, we need to sort through, and we need to release, because it's not all ours. Some of it we can
Yeah.
actually leave it where it's at, and
Yeah.
not take it with us, right? I think the other part, the we talked about meditation and all of these different things that we can do, walking, reading, working out, like you mentioned earlier, talking to the person that can help us through, a licensed professional that can actually, help us to see some patterns in ourselves and some help us with some coping strategies and all those things. All of that works to help us to be rooted,
Yeah.
and because of that, we're able to rise.
Yeah.
We're able to hope,
Whew.
we're able to, see what we can achieve. And I
Yeah.
think that because when you're so rooted, there's an anticipation. There's an anticipation that these things will happen, and you don't really doubt it because you are so rooted. Like with this good soil, with with these strong roots, hey, the fruit is going to, I'm going to bear the fruit. The fruit is
Yes.
going to be there, and so I do think in rising, has everything to do with the care that we put in being rooted. And I think that, we are able to truly rise when we are firmly and just kind of rooted. We can
Yes.
truly rise because there's a trust that comes with strong roots.
Yeah.
It's like, you ever seen like a really tall tree and it's like, all this stuff is around. It doesn't have a lot of place for these roots to go. We don't trust these roots. So if a storm comes, this big tree so it is something around trust. When something is firmly rooted and it's like really rooted to the ground, there's a trust that comes with that. And when we
Yeah.
begin to trust the things that we've rooted, we trust our soil and all of those things, the rising is inevitable. We literally anticipate it.
We're gonna bear that fruit. I love that. I appreciate you for answering that. All right, I want to make sure that we close this season off giving some tangible practices for trusting growth, as you just said, for that trust piece, for that root piece.
Mhm.
So, for our listeners, our gardeners, the folks who have joined us all season long,
Yes.
who want something real to hold on to, what are 3 ways to trust the process of growth?
3 ways to trust the process of growth. So I think one of the ways is being able to track it. A lot of times people talk about journaling, and sometimes people are like, I'm not a journaler and all those things. You don't have to be. You don't have to be, writing paragraphs and all of these things. Sometimes it's just important, to jot things down. Consider it like, again, we talked about data.
Mm,
And a lot of times the proof is in the pudding. So for me to recognize that growth is happening, that things are happening, I need to kind of track it because I can forget. We can kind of get weary sometimes, like, well, nothing is going right. Nothing has ever gone right. Life just is. And then you look back, you're like, well, wait a minute. I did do such and such. The last time I felt like this is something that I did to get myself through. I have had this to happen. And to be able to have some kind of record or some kind of tracking to say, okay, these are some of the things that have happened that have actually gone well and I've done well in, to, give you um give you that information that you are doing well. And just thinking about too, like if I'm putting certain things in place, right? And it's like, okay, I noticed that before. Another thing is, before I may have responded in this way, but then I responded in a different way, or I've stayed in this space, historically for a really long time, but the turnaround time for that, most recently has been much shorter. So being able
mm,
to notice this progress, even if in your mind is minimal, is progress, and it works towards, and it kind of gives you information that growth is happening. And asking yourself, what is it that feels safer than it used to? So it might be, when I go in certain spaces, or, when I have certain conversations. Before, I would be afraid and I wouldn't have these conversations because I was scared of how someone would respond, or, what someone might think of me. But now, I'm pushing past that discomfort and I'm having more, uncomfortable conversations. These are, questions that you can ask yourself, things that you can think through that can help you with kind of learning how to trust your growth, because you kind of need something that contextually you can go back to. When I was doing this was happening, so I need to continue to do this because these practices help me in my growth. So this is a way that I can continue to grow by participating in, these practices. I feel better. I feel steadier. These are the things that I need to do. So what are some of the things that you do to, to help you to feel like, you are growing, and also to trust that growth? And I do think that some of that goes back to asking yourself, what's the proof? What is the pudding? What have you seen?
mm, mm.
So those are some of the things that come to mind.
One last question before we get to the signature questions for the season. We're standing in the garden right now. It's been 8 episodes. What would we see or feel because we have been in this space with you?
Hmm. I don't even know exactly how to answer that. I would love to know. So if you are watching, please tell us in the comments what have you seen and felt based on um, what you've heard and what you've experienced. But I would like to think that people felt seen. They
Mm,
felt um, like they weren't alone. Um, they felt like they felt empowered.
mm,
Um, and they felt like it was okay to give themselves grace and space um, throughout whatever process they're experiencing. So that's some of the things that come up for me. Just thinking about that I would hope that people um, would think about themselves in a way that gives them room to make mistakes and not view them as failure, but view them as, just data. It's experience. It's something that I'm learning. It's like, oh, okay, that didn't work. Let me see what I can take from that. And I'm going to flip it. And so moving forward, I can keep that in mind when I go to the next thing. So it doesn't stop me. It gives me information as I, travel forward. You know what I mean? I might not take that route. I'm gonna take a different route because this is what I learned from it. So, the other thing is just to kind of keep moving. I hope people have felt that, like I could keep moving. There are people out here that have had similar experiences that help me to feel good about who I am, even if it's messy. Even if it
mm.
doesn't look so great, it's like, but I'm here. Dear God, I'm here. You know what I mean? Like I'm good people regardless, and I can still grow, in spite of the weeds that I'm navigating, and I'm still
Yeah,
growing in spite of the weeds that I'm navigating.
that was beautiful. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna ask you the signature questions one last time for this season, and then I'm gonna toss it back over to you. If you could plant one final seed about growth, what would it be?
What I'm thinking is if you feel like you are not growing. I'm thinking about my plants. And when I start being a plant mom and things weren't growing, I'm trying different things. I don't just say, oh, it's not growing and throw it away. I say,
Mm,
let me move it in a different place. Maybe it needs more sun. Oh, let me put it next to another plant. Maybe it needs a companion. Oh, let me, give it the water with the food in it. Let me repot it. I'm trying different things. So yes, there may be a stall
whew,
and also, but that's not necessarily the end. It's not the end. There are different things that you can do. So check in with yourself. What do I need? What are some of the things that I need? Because there
mm,
is something that is arresting my development and my growth right now. That is an indication, almost like a fever, like that something's going on and I need to intervene. There's something that needs to happen. So no, I don't have to stay stuck here. No, it doesn't mean that I have failed. I just need to go back under the hood and see what's
yeah,
going on under here. I got to move some things around.
move
Is
it
it the
around.
Cadillac converter? Like, what is going on under here? And kind of get those things together. I'm not going to give up on myself. So I would
Yeah,
just don't give up on yourself. Move in the sun a little closer. Give
mm,
yourself a little, the good water, that
yes.
Saratoga, or whatever
Not
that
the
water is called.
Saratoga, yes.
Drink some good water.
It's some good water. It's some good water.
What is it? What is it? Do I need to talk to somebody? Do I need to get outside? Like try different things because it's not necessarily that's it and that's all and I fail and I'm just a horrible person. No, you just might need to,
Yeah,
move stuff around a little bit. Just
yeah.
move stuff around a little bit. It's okay.
I appreciate that. Absolutely. All right, last question. What song do you want our listeners to check out to keep them rooted when rising feels slow?
I think that a great song to, just kind of even sum up the season is Rise Up by Andre Day.
Oh, I love that song.
Do you now?
Yes, I do.
I think that would be a great song to, leave folks with, just to kind of sum up an amazing season. I cannot believe that my scary behind, who did not even know what it would look like to start a podcast, having panic attacks, all nervous, you know, this is just an awesome, and it has been an awesome journey. It's been an awesome experience, and I thank you so much for helping me navigate it. I could not have done this without your support and help and guidance. This season has been great. I'm looking forward to the next.
I appreciate you. This was definitely an amazing and dope space. So I got you. Season 1 done. So much growth has happened already with you, with our listeners, and season 2 is going to be even better. And for season 2, we want to hear from you all. What do you want us to address and talk about? What do you want to hear Aiysha talk about? Who should we bring onto the show? Make sure you drop it in the comments for us. Or leave us an email at admin@blackunicornpro.com, and we will be able to see that. Aiysha, with heartfelt thanks and so much love for you, I appreciate you for hosting this first season of Tend to It, and I'm going to hop up off this so you can give that last Tend to It practice and close us out.
Absolutely. Thank you, T.
Of course.
As we close the season, here's your Tend to It practice. Once this week, notice one small way you are not who you used to be. It may not be perfect. You may feel like it's not finished, and that's okay. Progress, not perfection. We're going to close with the breath as always. Inhale and exhale. Thank you for tending this season with us, for showing up, for staying, for trusting the process, even when it felt slow. This may be the close of season 1, but the garden isn't done. Stay tuned for season 2. We're still growing. And remember, your growth is worth the care you give. So be it, tend to it. This podcast reflects my personal reflections and professional insights as a licensed therapist, but it is not a substitute for therapy. The conversations and practices shared here are for educational and inspirational purposes only. If you are seeking mental health support, I encourage you to connect with a licensed therapist in your area who can provide individualized care. Tend to It is a production of Black Unicorn Productions. This episode was executive produced by Tanisha Williams. Special thanks to you, our community, for showing up and tending to it with us. Until next time, remember, the soil is rich, the seasons will change, and your growth is worth the care that you give. So be it, tend to it.